What motivates your engagement with the art of music? What do you find more often than not is inspiring your activity as a composer?
It's hard to answer that without sounding pretentious. Um, Life, at least I suppose the things I've experienced in my life, and believing that what I've experienced is not so unusual,
Yeah.
it's not unique, that those feelings, those points of view, experiences, whatever, um, are common enough so that I might be able to say something that would be meaningful to somebody else about them. Now that doesn't mean everything just comes from my own life, but the books I read, the music I listen to, all of those are shaped by my own interests. And so, yes, it might be a book that sets me off, rather than something in my own life, or a work of visual art, a painting. Um, there's a piece of mine called Gorgon that really it comes from the three figures at the base of a crucifixion by Francis Bacon, that triptych from 1944, which is in the Tate Gallery. So there are all sorts of things that may relate very specifically to events in my life, such as the pieces that I wrote in the early 90s that are all death pieces, because every time I had a commission to fulfill and was getting started, suddenly someone died that was close to me or that had an impact on me. So I felt the need in each of those pieces to make some sort of reflection upon that, or memorial or whatnot. But in other cases, yeah, it just might be somebody else's work.
This week has been surrounded with preparations for the premiere here in LA. You've been through this process so many times. Tell me, what is the significance to you personally in the relationship between yourself as a composer, the audience, the performers, and a new piece of music in general?
I know there are some composers who are really only interested in there are some composers who don't care what anybody else thinks, as long as they themselves are satisfied, which I think is a bunch of nonsense. There are some composers who just value the relationship between the musicians and the composer. If the musicians are really with it, that's what's rewarding. Now, I grant you, I do think of the audience, which I know some people would say, well, that's pandering. If you're thinking, Schoenberg was asked about what the audience meant to him, and he said the audience was an unfortunate necessity that filled up a performing space. That was all he thought about the audience. Well, so I'm sorry, I don't buy that attitude. But at the same time, I don't want to alienate musicians on the way to saying something that I hope speaks to an audience. Everything is about emotion as far as I'm concerned, and I think probably the rap on me is that I am hyper emotional in my work. I'm not interested in technique for the sake of technique. Sure, one has to know one's craft and have a sense of how to organize a piece and make it interesting and coherent, etc. But all of that, I believe, certainly for my music, is at the servant of saying something that I think is important on an expressive level. And again, I mean, I suppose there's a certain pretentiousness about it, but I really would feel most successful if I felt that my music was really making a difference in people's lives, if I were saying something meaningful about the human experience, about what it is to be alive, that can not be about me per se, but really be universal enough so that many people can be affected by it.
What is it with you and Berlioz? I mean, not just with the Requiem, but with your work in general. There's this affiliation or association between your music and his. How do you explain that?
I don't know why, but his music speaks to me in a way that is more profound than any other composer I know. And I am very attracted to the combination of this wild, innovative, crazy man, very forward-looking, with the traditionalist classicist for whom Gluck was the greatest of all composers. It's a fascinating mix. He is a wild-eyed romantic and a very clear-headed classicist. Those two personality traits exist in the same person. And it's not unlike the way I think of myself. I am a traditionalist in many ways, but there's this other part of me that does like to push the envelope and see how far I can go and how much I can get away with. But his music just has a special connection or a special meaning for me, and I feel especially connected to it, almost as though I'd written it myself.
Looking over your accomplishments as a composer, one might easily guess where some of the high points have been for you. Winning the Pulitzer Prize, the Grammy Award, various major commissions and premieres. Have there been moments where you have just felt the weight of the shadow of greatness to which your music aspires, and you've just thought, I can never get there, or this will just not measure up?
Well, Steve Stuckey has this wonderful quote, which is that we all as composers strive to be Beethoven, as good as Beethoven, but that when we really look at ourselves honestly in the mirror, we'll be happy if in our lifetimes we've written a few measures as good as Massenet. Well, of course I feel, who am I trying to kid? Obviously the verdict of history is not mine to really influence. I don't think about it. I'm not thinking about, is this a masterpiece? I'm just trying to write the best music I can. And although I probably am too hard on myself in terms of what I think I may or may not have achieved, I don't feel as though Beethoven is looking over my shoulder. I don't, well, yes, if I can write a few measures as good as Massenet, I'll be happy. And I love Massenet. This is, I don't look at, and so does Steve Stuckey, the guy who's made that comment. Granted, Massenet is not Beethoven, but he wrote some wonderful music. And most composers don't get to write anything in their lifetimes as good as a few measures of Massenet. So if I can do that, that would be wonderful. But you just try to do the best you can, and I think the more you think about such issues, the deeper the hole you're digging for yourself, because then you become overly self-conscious and self-aware. I just think you just need to go off and write the best music you can.